God has a hard-on.
The perfect world was a dream for primitive cerebral.
He's a traitor! He's a sadist!
You're all going to die down here.
The greatest trick the devil ever pulled was convincing the world he didn't exist.
Happy heresies, my beloved true seekers. Every week we return to the virtual Alexandria, the state of mind where East meets West, and blaspheme against the archonic power structures within and outside of us. Can you just taste the winds of hell and the tears of Hecate here at Aeon Byte, broadcast through the GodAboveGod.com? Can you hear the disintegration of scholarly pontification and New Age babble? Can you sense your own personal Dionysus rising through your wounded heart with intoxicating divine knowledge? Perhaps the stumbling of Shiva, because we are now the cosmic dancers who are no longer controlled by karma, the zodiac and its stars, or the puppet strings of the crones of fate.
You don't understand by now. You can't stop fate. No one can. It's like a living thing. It swallows us all into darkness.
And you are not allowed here, old man, until you recover your wisdom, your Shekinah, your Helen, your world soul, your divine feminine principle. We've never belonged in your defective world, so stay outside of our sanctuary. Stay outside the cyber gates of the virtual Alexandria, holding your massive solar penis, Jehovah, Yaldabaoth, Zeus, Philip K. Dick's Zebra or Artifact, Blake's Urizen, The Matrix, Pink Floyd's The Machine, Indra, the Ego, the Big Brother archetype, Allah, and all the other names you've gone through throughout your testosterone reign of the material world.
God isn't interested in technology. He knows nothing of the potential of the microchip or the silicon revolution. Look how he spends his time. 43 species of parrots. Nipples for men.
Put out the sun, pack up the stars. They are not needed anymore. Only our imagination and interstellar joy, now that we know we are gods in the becoming, and that the audience beyond the veil of tears and the treasured light has been rooting for us the entire time. Exit stage left. Great album, by the way. And let the show go on.
I want to live a real life. I don't want to dream any longer.
Oscar Wilde once said, "We are all in the gutter, but some of us are looking at stars." That is us, my beloved true seekers, the Gnostics and the lovers of the esoterica. We are the knowers of the unknown, and the one whose spiritual ears are attuned to the eternal call of Barbelo and the cosmic yet indwelling Christ.
Your destiny lies along a different path from mine.
Unlike the literalists and their vegetative Bible, our canon is fluid like mercury, yet invisible like the dark matter that encompasses most of the universe. Our holy writs are organic, mythical, and in the milieu of the culture. Our Korans are many and take diverse mediums, including poetry, sacred geometry and art, theater, movies, and even the silence of our own meditation.
If I don't finish my meditation, I tend to get a little cranky.
And on this approximately Saturday, October 4th, the year of our Demiurge 2008, your host Abraxas, in his mortal incarnation of Miguel Connor, reveals a very crucial yet overlooked Gnostic gospel. And that is the Book of Faustus, a mystical narrative of impossible secrets with a Protestant flavor that, like so many other Gnostic vulgates, has evolved throughout history. I'm sure most of you know of its various avatars, channeled through Christopher Marlowe, Goethe, Thomas Mann, and even Randy Newman, who wrote a whole concept album on the legend of Faustus.
Don't act like you're not impressed.
We all know the extroverted archetypal story of the Faustian tragedy, and that is, man is pissed off with his life. Man seeks or makes a deal with some denizen of the outer realms, usually infernal. Man parties like Lindsay Lohan in a girl's locker room teeming with drunken cheerleaders. Man gets that nagging feeling at the back of his head that he has screwed the pooch, tries to break the blood contract, and learns much about the nature of the cosmos and himself. Man is taken to Hades and suffers a fate worse than one of the villains in the movie RoboCop, or accidentally being placed on an internet date with Needlehead.
Your suffering will be legendary, even in hell.
But you'll blithely be surprised when you find the arcane undercurrent of the Faustus legend and what makes it a barefaced Gnostic gospel, and much more. With us to shed moonlight on the darkness of Dr. Faustus is our astral guest, Ramona Fradon, author of the recently released The Gnostic Faustus, a work that took her decades to research and write as she unlocked the alchemical, Eastern, Hermetical, and Gnostic secrets of the Book of Faustus.
I'm gonna need so much therapy after this!
Ramona is also a famous comic book artist. She has illustrated sumless issues of both DC and Marvel comics, including Superman, Batman, Plastic Man, the Fantastic Four, and Brenda Starr. She has even drawn the adventures of Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy from the SpongeBob comic series, only adding to her coolness. Ramona was inducted into the Comic Book Hall of Fame in 2006, and in between, she bled to give us the Gnostic Faustus.
I rock with me.
It's a real spiritual and psychic orgy of a book, my beloved truth seekers. It's obvious that Ramona exhausted a large part of her life researching the Book of Faustus. Not only will you get a consummate history of this satanic tale and its historical and literary development, you'll also understand the intricate plotline without having to spend 3 credit courses in college. But then comes the esoteric kicker. Ramona, using the interlinear method, parallels the Book of Faustus with several Gnostic scriptures, such as the Faust and Sophia, the Secret Book of John, the Tripartite Tractate, the Exegesis of the Soul, the Gospel of Truth, the Manichaean Psalms, and the legend of Simon Magus himself, who was known in ancient time as Faustus, or the Fortunate One in Latin. So don't think for a moment there is any coincidence or happenstance between the adventures of the apostate doctor and the Gnostic narrative of the fall of Sophia or the soul.
There are no coincidences, Delia. Only the illusion of coincidence.
Adding to this delightful feast of the higher mind, Ramona also ties the Faustian tragedy, or actually redemption in its camouflage meaning, with steroid evidence to the schools of tantric initiation and other Eastern dogma, alchemical philosophy, hermetical vision, and much, much more. While we party with Faustus and Mephistopheles in their junket into the bridal chamber of the center of creation and imagination, Ramona breaks down every symbol, every wizardly nuance, and every plot twist, until the story is a naked recital of man's awakening into higher state of consciousness.
Everybody's hell is different. It's not all fire and pain. The real hell is your life gone wrong.
The Gnostic Faustus is thorough as it is inspirational. In fact, you might learn a few mystical techniques from all her scholarship that you can use in your daily praxis. Ah, my beloved truth seekers, heresy shouldn't be this much fun. Our creations, inspired by the rainfall of the pleroma, are like ripening holy virus that gulls Jehovah and his angelic mafia, the bureaucratic fortresses of orthodoxy in all its ghoul manifestations, and the cold gaze of scholars who have sold their souls to the clone domains of academia.
How many more? Just think how many have died in your name.
The Book of Faustus is a perfect example, hiding Sophia, the keys of gnosis, and the liberating tsunami that is mythology. The Islamic Ismailis and Sufis, the Knight Templars and Freemason, Rumi and Keats, Jung and Philip K. Dick, Herman Melville and William Blake and so many others have crafted these celestial, plasmatic works that shutter their moments in history and adapt for future generations in a mutating fashion. But enough of my drivel. Let us join Ramona, Faustus, Mephistopheles, and Lucifer himself on a dark odyssey into the Gnostic soul.
All you have to do is track down fugitives and haul their asses over to a portal to hell. Easy.
What do you mean by portal?
Well, any place that seems like hell on earth is hell on earth. You know, like the DMV on Union Street.
This is the Aeon Byte interview. With us today we have the pleasure of having Ramona Fradon, and we will be discussing her brand new book, The Gnostic Faustus, and the legend of Faustus himself and all his Gnosticism. How are you doing today, Ramona?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Well, first of all, very, as I mentioned before, very extensive book, way due to come out. But how did you first become interested in Faustus and Gnosticism, respectively?
I'd gone to art school and was a cartoonist, and at around age 50, I decided I wanted to go to college. I'd always regretted not going, so I enrolled at NYU, and in the second semester that I was there, I took a course in called The Myth of Faust. And the second book that we read, or the very first book that we read, I should say, was the Faust book, the original version of the Faust legend. And as I read it, I thought, this is saying something more than it seems to be saying. The book was filled with, mysterious symbols and numbers and strange, bizarre events. At the time, I happened to be reading a book on alchemy by Titus Burckhardt, and I came across a chapter in the Faust book that seemed to be a metaphor for an engraving that Burckhardt had put in his book, showing some men being dragged from the terrestrial sphere by the hairs of their heads up into the 24th sphere where Jesus was enthroned at the top. And this chapter in the Faust book had Faustus dragging a butler by the hair of his head and depositing at the top of a tall fir tree with very few branches at the top, and immediately the image came into my mind of the same process. And so I began to research it, and I ran into a lot of that was the year, by the way, that the Nagamati Library first was published in English, and I just picked it up in a bookstore and started thumbing through it, and I just was struck by, it seemed to me as though the Faust book was a running metaphor for a kind of a composite of some of the creation myths I read in the Nagamati Library. So that started me on a 30-year deciphering of the Faust book.
And could you tell us about the origins of the legend of Faustus and its evolution? I guess starting, is there any historical basis for the character Faustus?
Yeah, I think it's pretty generally accepted that the Faust book was inspired, at least in part, by the exploits of a historical character named George Faustus, who was a charlatan. He was an astrologer and an alchemist and a kind of a mountebank, and he indulged in drink and sexual perversion, and he was a scandalous character that caught the fancy of the German people at the time. He died around 1540, and even before his death, legends began to circulate around central and southern Germany, interlaced with folk tales, and they were embellished by a couple of writers who wrote some little Faust stories. They were kind of the precursors of the Faust book that finally came out around 1570. And scholars have thought that the Faust book was just another attempt to cash in on this, this kind of prurient interest among the Germans. And so, obviously I've discovered that the Faust book has a great deal more to it than just a simple entertainment. During the time after the Faust book was written, it became incredibly popular. It was passed surreptitiously from hand to hand among the German people who were at that moment, in outward rebellion against the Catholic Church. And they were titillated by Faustus' extra-clerical search for enlightenment. And the book became, or the manuscript became wildly popular. And it was adapted into puppet plays and farces that made their way all over Europe or wherever wherever Roman rule was being challenged. And finally, it landed in the hands of Christopher Marlowe, who wrote his own adaptation of Faust, and it was that adaptation really that launched the Faust book or the legend of Faust into history.
And Ramona, didn't Marlowe, some say he wrote it against John Dee, Queen Elizabeth's magician? What do you think of this?
Yes, that's a British historian has suggested that Dee was some kind of an it's very complicated politics of the time, but he was against the Renaissance Magus and the whole idea of magic that was so prevalent in the Renaissance, and I think it was an attempt to really get at Dee and weaken his influence and the influence of Renaissance magic at the time. For the next century or so, it was the legend degenerated into crude street plays and farces, with an emphasis on Faustus' interest in Helen. They played up the kind of I don't know if it was a sexual aspect, but they just wanted to titillate the audiences even more. And Faustus' desire for knowledge became a desire for gold or for women. It lost its spiritual core completely, and it just became a kind of a prurient thing. After a while, writers like Lessing and then Goethe and operas were written. There were 3 Faust operas, and then of course Goethe wrote his Faust, and that was the crowning achievement, the thing that turned Faust into a modern myth, really. Goethe was an alchemist, so he must have understood the underlying message of the Faust book, because his Faust is alchemical in nature. But even he was a creature of the age of reason to a certain extent, and even he could not. He was dealing with the how should we say, the divided man, the Faustus of the surface story in the original Faust book, the man who had to deal with the material world and with his own divided nature. And it seems as if Goethe couldn't find a way to help Faust transcend himself and transcend the struggle in his own nature. So he had to settle for it was like a moral impasse, because as Faust strove to realize his highest potential, he was destroying everything in his wake. And so the question arose: can a man truly strive and reach his potential without causing such destruction? And is it worth it? Whereas in the Faust book, the underlying message is one of hope. That while Faustus is a divided man and he fails in the surface story, in the underlying message, which is a parallel to Sophia's, the goddess Sophia's transformation journey. The ending is she's saved in the end. She's redeemed. She achieves a breakthrough to an elevation of consciousness, and that's something that none of the succeeding Fausts have ever achieved, because essentially the Faust book is based on a rigorous initiation experience. I mean, that's essentially what Faustus' journey was. It was a tantric, alchemical journey toward enlightenment that involved rigorous discipline and internal probing. And none of these other Fausts really have had to deal with that, or have even had an inkling that that was what was under there. In the end, though, it seems to me as if the Faust legend has come full circle in Thomas Mann's Dr. Faust, because Dr. Faustus, excuse me, because Mann even though Faust at the end was as corrupt as the Nazi period that he was involved in, at the end of the book, there's a message of hope, just a glimmer of hope, and that is essentially what, and I mean, in the midst of utter despair and just crushing hopelessness, there's this last little note of hope that lingers at the end of the book, and that's exactly what the underlying message of the Faust book was, that in Sophia's hour of darkest despair, she had faith and she had hope, and she waited in the darkness for Jesus to come and redeem her. And when she had proven that she had that faith and that she maintained the hope, he did come and he saved her. He poured his light stream into her and saved her. So somehow I think Mann picked up that message somewhere and repeated it in his book. So it's interesting because as a cartoonist, I myself I drew an adaptation of Faust one year.
Wow.
It was a kind of a combination of the picture of Dorian Gray and Faust. This man sold his soul to the devil so that he would remain beautiful all of his life.
Wow.
So there's just no telling how many Faust adaptations there have been over the centuries of one kind or another.
And the concept of selling your soul to the devil, did it begin with the Book of Faustus, or was it just something ingrained in medieval times?
I think so. It came out of all kinds of legends about. I believe there's a medieval legend about a man who had a room full of gold that he'd made a pact with the devil to find. I think it's just simply a common human dilemma, that you'll give this for that, and the consequences come later on. And I think we all struggle with that to a certain extent. It's interesting, though, that over time, as the Faust book adapted itself to different ages, Mephistopheles has changed his character. In some ages he's stronger, in some ages he becomes weak and is the one who's defeated. Faustus becomes stronger or weaker. And in the Romantic era, the villain was no longer Mephistopheles; it was society and the new terrible civilization that the Romantics felt was evolving. So that Mephistopheles almost became an irrelevant character during that period. Faustus became a cynic because of, corrupted by the evils of society. And in other ages, he became he was treated sentimentally. And even though he died, people sympathized with him. They couldn't condemn him for what he had done, but they sympathized with him. And so, in every era interprets the Faust book, the Faust legend, in its own light. It just has an amazing capacity to endure.
Well, Ramona, what makes the Book of Faustus a bona fide Gnostic gospel? I guess we can start with. How do you relate Simon Magus and the story of Helen into it?
Well, Simon Magus was a Gnostic magician who went around in the first century. He claimed that he was Christ and was a rival of Jesus. And of course, in the Acts, he competed with Peter and was defeated. He was flying through the air and he fell down. So. He obviously was a rival to be reckoned with by the early Christians, or at least the Peter branch of Christianity at that time. He went around with a woman named Helen, whom he claimed was a reformed prostitute, and Faustus had a had conjured up a goddess named Helen who became his wife, I suppose, and they had a child. So there's and this Helen that he conjured up had a kind of a wanton air to her. Not that she was a prostitute, but there was that suggestion of sexuality and seductiveness. And both of these characters, the Helen that Simon Magus went around with, and Faustus Helen, were based on Sophia, the goddess of wisdom, who is called the whore in her fallen state. When she descended into matter and assumed the body and all of its temptations, she fell into degradation, and so they called her the whore. So that seems to be the origin I believe Simon Magus probably was using that legend. In fact, he compared Helen to Helen of Troy.
Yeah, you believed she was a reincarnation of Helen of Troy.
Yeah, exactly.
Don't you think it's an amazing coincidence that Simon Magus was also called Faustus?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, he called himself Faustus, which means favored one in Latin. And this takes us to a complicated retracing of history, and the whole movement that arose from John the Baptist through Simon Magus and up through perhaps the Templars and the Rosicrucians. It seems to be, according to this strain of thought, there seems to have been a connection between Simon Magus and John the Baptist. Jesus and Simon Magus were said to be rivals to have taken over when John the Baptist was beheaded, and apparently Simon Magus won the battle, and which is why he was called the favored one, perhaps. But the speculation goes that it is possible that since Magus and his Helen studied with John the Baptist, that John the Baptist may have been practicing sacramental sex the way it's assumed that Simon Magus and his Helen figure were doing too. And of course that's the way Faust and his Helen were practicing a kind of sacramental sex too. So there's this strange early connection between all of these characters. And it does seem to go back to the idea of the priest and priestess, who are practicing sacramental sex. Well, I mean, of course, everybody knows that all the latest theories about Jesus and Mary Magdalene. So the interest seems to be converging around that idea that there was some kind of a fertility or some kind of a sexually potent ritual or practice that was being done in the early Christian centuries that was suppressed by the church when the Orthodox Church, when it took power.
And Ramona, you do a great job of paralleling the story of Faust with several Gnostic Gospels from the Nag Hammadi Library and the Pistis Sophia. What I'm getting is the underlying theme is the story of Faust, the same story as the Gnostic, which is the fall of the soul and its redemption. Right. Is that what I'm getting?
Yes, exactly. The underlying myth is a composite of four essential Gnostic creation myths. The Apocryphon of John, which is probably the oldest one that's in existence, and the Tripartite Tractate, and the Pistis Sophia, which is a soteriological treatise, and the Manichaean creation myth, as well as the Hymn of the Pearl from the Apocryphal Acts of Thomas. So the authors seem to have taken highlights from all of those books and created this composite myth, and then matched it with the Faust book plot, or matched the Faust book plot with this. It's beyond me how he approached this task, but somehow he did it. And the myth contains features the story of Sophia, who who was the favorite. He was God's favorite. She's been described in myths the way Lucifer has been described in Christian myth. She was the jewel of heaven, the favorite of God, and she transgressed. And her transgression was to want to know the Father directly, to approach the Father, the unknowable Father directly, which broke a central law of the light world. Nobody was to know the Father, only to sing praises to him and to worship him. But she wanted to see him directly, and so she approached his light and mistakenly followed the light of a jealous fellow Aeon into the darkness. And as she descended into the darkness, she began to experience grief and to doubt and fear. And when she got all the way down there, she began to repent. And as the myth goes, her emotions turned into the four elements. They hardened or coalesced into matter and became the building blocks of the material world. So Sophia was at one time, at the same time, she was the creator of the material world according to this particular composite myth, and was also the world soul whose transformation of consciousness became a model for human beings to follow who are on the path of enlightenment. So the Faust book in that, so Sophia's, Faustus actions in the Faust book parallel Sophia's actions as she's falling into disgrace and exile. His corruption by the devil, his seduction by beautiful women, his indulgences, and his eventual damnation are metaphors for her fall out of grace, her transgression and falling out of grace, and her dissolution and seduction when she was in exile. But the difference is the two stories converge because Sophia is ultimately redeemed, and in the surface story, Faustus is damned and dies. So in the sense, up until the end, his story parallels Sophia's and is a kind of a running metaphor for her initiation. His initiation is not only parallels Sophia's story, but it's also enhanced by alchemical symbols and tantric events and symbols in the Faust book, indicating the type of initiation he was undergoing.
Yeah, it's odd because even at the end, before he gets dismembered and suffers this very gruesome fate, but he seems to take it with a sense of dignity and peace.
Yes, exactly. That struck me when I first read the book. I thought there's some sense of holiness that's flickering around him, in spite of how this narrator is telling us what a terrible person he is, And it was another thing that made me suspicious that there was something else going on. And in fact, his last speech to his students was so reminiscent of Jesus, last words with his Last Supper and the words that he spoke to his disciples.
Very true.
So he's, there's no doubt that in this book, Faustus, while he represents the divided human soul, the sort of Adamic soul who struggles with his lower nature, he also in the Faust book plays the role of the Logos. He plays many roles in the Faust book, and one of them is a Jesus figure, a savior figure, because he goes around like the Manichaean Jesus, healing and answering the call of sick souls when they need him. He spends the last half of the book flying around through the air from place to place and answering calls, for people who needed healing or needed help out of dilemmas that needed transformation. They were in need of transformation, and he was always that's what he did the last years of the last part of the book. So he, even though, as I said, the narrator kept talking about how he was damned and doomed, he really was living a quite different life that I think escapes a lot of people who read the book, you know, because they're not aware of what the underlying message is and what he's parodying.
And Ramona, coming to the villain, Mephistopheles, he's obviously more than just an archon. What exactly does he symbolize?
He symbolizes, I think that to my mind, Mephistopheles is basically an alchemical figure. The alchemical process is based on destruction and dissolution and then coagulation. The metal is dissolved over and over again, and it's coagulated over and over again, and each time the process repeats itself, the metal is reformed at a higher stage of perfection, or closer to a stage of perfection. And Mephistopheles plays the role of mercury in the alchemical process, which is a corrosive, dissolving agent. And it battles with sulfur in the alchemist's vessel. Sulfur is the forming, solidifying, fixing agent, and sulfur is constantly trying to reform the dissolved metal, and mercury is constantly trying to dissolve it. And so studying the Faust book has really changed my idea of what good and evil is, because to my mind, clear that Mephistopheles' role was part of a transformation process, and even though it was dissolving and destructive, it was also constructive, or it paved the way for a new beginning each time. So Mephistopheles also represents the spirits in the Faust book that come down, that the Father sends down from above to bring the message of light to people and to humans, and to guide them. He's the servant soul, the spirit who comes down, and he's referred to as the servant and the spirit in the Faust book more than he is as the devil, except for the times when he takes on the role of something that acts contrary to transformation.
And then there's a character, Wagner, who's Faustus's kind of sidekick. What exactly is his purpose in the book?
This kind of takes us to the tantric idea of the guru and the disciple. There's a kind of a chain of transmission of tantric thought that descends from guru to disciple through the generations, and and the disciple is there to carry on the work, to take over from the guru, and to absorb the secret knowledge, and it's a kind of a line of transmission that descends forever. It corresponds to Seth and his descendants, Seth descends from Adam, and Seth preserved secret knowledge up on a mountaintop, which I suspect is the cranial vault in Kundalini yoga. But at any rate, only certain people are given the knowledge, the secret knowledge, and it's the same thing. I mean, there's a similarity between the tantric notion and the Gnostic notion of this secret transmission of knowledge.
Well, you also talk a lot about the Kundalini.
Yes, yes.
What is the Kundalini, and where do we find it in the Book of Faust?
Okay, to me, this is a really fascinating part of the Faust book, because while Faustus is playing the role of sulfur in the alchemical process, and Mephistopheles is mercury, in the tantric process, Faustus is playing the role of the guru, or actually, he's playing the role of the disciple, and Mephistopheles is the guru who is leading him through this tantric initiation. And what it involves is working with it involves Kundalini yoga, which is a practice. The Kundalini is according to tantric belief and theory and practice, the Kundalini is an energy, a kind of a universal energy that resides in the human body at the base of the spine, and it sleeps there until it's awakened. And it is a universal consciousness, and when it's awakened and made to rise up through an invisible spine that parallels the physical one, it can transform consciousness and bring about an enlightened state of mind. And yogis practice for years to learn to awaken and control that energy and send it up through the chakras, which are whirling energy centers along the spine, along the invisible spine, that represent or stimulate higher and higher stages of consciousness. There are many symbols and indications in the Faust book that what Faustus is doing is practicing with a yoga. He's practicing learning how to control the Kundalini, to awaken it, and to make it rise up the spine and into the cranial vault, which produces a bliss and a kind of an end to dualistic thinking. It's really a breakthrough to universal consciousness when that happens. And there are just all kinds of indications, particularly Faustus' descent into hell seems to be a metaphor, a running metaphor for the awakening of the Kundalini and the Kundalini experience. It's very vivid. The writer of the Faust book, it seems to me, must have been a practicing alchemist and tantrist. And I don't believe that he could have written this if he weren't, because it seems to the symbolism and the description seems to arise from direct experience. It's so vivid.
Yeah, and one of the other things you write about is tantric sex, and this is maybe on a side note, but how one of the ways of experiencing it is for the man before he ejaculates to withhold it, and somehow that stimulates the Kundalini. To me, that sounds just too painful. But that's all.
Well, that's why Faustus was in hell.
But isn't it one scene in hell? He actually tries to hold in his semen.
Yes.
So he's actually feeling the Kundalini.
Yeah, he falls down. He falls off of his chariot, which represents a kind of a journey to enlightenment, He falls off his chariot and screams, woe and waily. And what he's really doing is losing control of his these powerful feelings that raising the Kundalini arouses. But the theory of withholding ejaculation is that instead of the energy going downward and being released through orgasm, the yoga controls the energy, reverses it, and sends the semen. It gets immolated in the fires of the Kundalini arousal and goes up in kind of a vapor up this invisible spine and brings this incredibly blissful experience. And they call that, the yogis say, when the Kundalini rises, a man dies. No, when the Kundalini, wait a minute, how did that go? And I'm going to ruin this. Let's forget it.
It happens.
It's a sort of a paradoxical remark about death and life, But I can't remember it well enough. I don't want to ruin it.
But here's a question, and again, it's a little off topic, but what if you're a woman? What are you supposed to do to get the Kundalini going?
Well, orgasms can be arrested in either case, In the man's case, it's releasing sperm, but it's that energy of orgasm that can be reversed and sent up the spine. But most of the literature, of course, has been written by men about men. So there hasn't been, to my knowledge, anyway. I'm sure that there are people who who know more about this than I do. But most of the literature has been written, about a man's experience, the male experience. In the tantric process, just as in the alchemical process, the goal is to reconcile the opposites, because both the alchemists and the tantrists posited a universe that was this as a vibrating energy field of positive and negative polarities, issuing from a single, undivided, unified source. And the goal of the tantrist, as it is of the alchemist, is to reconcile those opposites and bring the metal or the person's consciousness back into unity, the original unity. And they both do this by a kind of an oscillating process. The Kundalini rises up and then falls and rises up and falls, and as it does, the yoga goes in and out of consciousness and eventually, reaches enlightenment. Whereas in alchemy, the alchemist dissolves his metal and then reforms it and then dissolves it and reforms it. And it's this oscillating back and forth process that seems to be at the core of both of these disciplines or practices. And that's what made it possible for the Faust book author to create this book on these levels, because the events or the stages of each of these processes are analogous to each other, so that a symbol of one can mean the other as well, and it's true too in the Gnostic myth. Death and rebirth is an essential part of the process there too. And it's this process of death and rebirth that brings about purification and perfection.
And Ramona, your book very well brings in the classic Gnostic influence, Manichaean, alchemical, Eastern, and so forth that influenced and are injected in the book of Faustus. But you also talk about the Hermetic influence. Is it only the alchemical side, or are there other Hermetical influences in it?
Well, it's the Hermetic philosophy which again is completely compatible with the tantric and Gnostic, tantric and alchemical and Gnostic philosophy. This idea of the unity producing the duality, and that in turn produces the tensions that create the material world. That it's based on these polarities, and the purpose of all three disciplines, the Gnostics and the Hermetics, the alchemists, the tantrists, was to transcend these opposites, to reconcile them, and go back to the original unity. As far as I understand the Gnostic myth, the idea of the Gnostic creation, the idea of the single unified source of light dividing and then multiplying and emanating, more and more denser and denser layers of existence, you might say, comes from this is according to George Mead, who is a wonderful Gnostic scholar around the turn of the 20th century. His idea was that this mythology was stemmed from a kind of a vision of the inner ordering of things, that it was based essentially, he suggested at any rate, on the splitting of the atom, and the proliferation of its parts, and the whirling, and that the Gnostic myth follows that pattern of development, which to me makes it a really interesting thing. It just seems as though it has more of a grounding to a certain extent in science and in the inner reality than some other myths might have. I mean, to me, the Christian myth seems to be a kind of a borrowing from here and there, and doesn't have that inner cohesion and sort of dynamism that Gnostic myth has. And also, I suppose from another point of view, Gnostic myth is really a kind of a pattern of the human psyche. It's a diagram or a prescription for the transformation of the human psyche, that the cosmos evolves in the same way that a human that human transformation process evolves. It starts out, let's say, in purity or innocence, the human, and then devolves into a kind of a chaos and confusion, and for, of pulling, conflicting impulses. And then the human's task is to reconcile them and go back to the original unity. And so it's the same way the cosmos devolved into the material plane. The cosmos way of healing itself is through the agent of human transformation. That gets into a whole complicated, the idea of what the material universe is based on. According to this version, this myth, it's based on ignorance. It evolved from Sophia's ignorance and her four passions, and that this world that we live in is a world that is called the world of oblivion, and it's a world of duality where we're projecting outward and we see evil out there, and we're subject to terrors and fears, and the struggle is to return to that, the sense of our own divinity, the inner God, the light that's in us, and they fail, and according to the Tantras, when they reconcile opposites and raise the Kundalini, that the dualistic world vanishes, and people live in a state of sort of unified grace.
And lastly, it seems obviously the Book of Faust was written in Protestant milieu. Do you see the book being, like other writings, polemic against the Catholic Church?
Oh, yeah, clearly.
I mean, I know he goes visits the Pope, and all I can remember is how opulent and rich the Pope was. But are there any other shots at the Catholic Church?
Well, that's a beautiful one, because his visit to the corrupt palace of the Pope comes at the point in the alchemical process where the metal is becoming corrupted and stinking, turns into a black stinking mass, That's when he visits the palace of the Pope. And he always has, he matches Wittenberg, where Luther's that was his center, he matches that in the underlying text with references to, heaven and, the heavenly hierarchy and that sort of thing. And he matches Munich which was a Catholic stronghold, with stages of unenlightenment. I mean, there are all kinds of little digs that go on in the Faust book that are really quite funny. Takes shots at the Turks, he visits the Emperor's harem. And it's really, such a funny Renaissance book. I mean, some of the humor, the hidden humor in it is very bawdy and something you wouldn't expect from a spiritual book. But I think that the Gnostics had a pretty basic sense of humor.
Yeah, and they like taking their shots very subtly whenever they could.
Oh, yeah.
I think that's all the time we have today. I'd like to thank you very much, Ramona, for coming on and giving us a little tidbit on your very stimulating and, I believe, important book.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you again, and have yourself a good day.
Okay.
Hope to have you on soon. Bye.
Thank you.
Bearable, isn't it? The suffering of strangers, the agony of friends. There is a secret song at the center of the world, Joey, and its sound is like razors through flesh.
I don't believe you.
Oh, come. Oh, you can hear its faint echo right now. I'm here to turn up the volume, to press the stinking face of humanity into the dark blood of its own secret heart.
And there you have it, my beloved True Seekers. Our interview with Ramona Fradon, centered on her book, The Gnostic Faustus. We did what we could, but only touched the surface of the glittering lake of occult knowledge that the book stores. Check it out and check out of reality for a moment to spell. I still don't know about this withholding your ejaculation to awaken the Kundalini stuff. Seems like you've got to tame one snake in order to release another snake. Maybe some of you can try it and let me know, without too much of the physical details, please.
One time, at band camp, I stuck a flute in my...
In our introduction and interview, we mention myth quite often. You've heard me expose the truth about myth many a drivel in past shows of Aeon Byte. Myth is the inner language of the spirit, I've said. Myth is becoming transparent to the transcendental. Religion is but myth misunderstood. Myth is the history before history. Ritual is simply reenacting the myth. C.G. Jung said that dreams are private myths, and myths are public dreams. Joseph Campbell said myth provides a field in which you can locate yourself, your true self. I've explained myth in detail and with less pithy comments, but I want to make sure you never forget that myth, in its true form, is not only essential to Gnosticism, but the metaphysical health of any human and any human civilization.
Maybe the human race deserves to be wiped out.
I won't harpoon you more with the importance of myth, but let me quote you from the great scholar Heinrich Zimmer, who once said, "The best things can't be told. They are transcendental, inexpressible truths. The second best are misunderstood. They are myth, which are metaphoric attempts to point the way towards the first. And the third best have to do with history, science, biography, and so on. The only kind of talking that can be understood is this last kind. When you want to talk about the first kind, that which can't be said, use the third kind as a communication to the first. But people read it as referring to the third directly. The image is no longer transparent to the transcendental. So see the legend of Faustus as a watery, Gnostic parable with many versions, many interpretations, and many lessons. Don't limit yourself to the outer meaning when, as Ramona proves in her book, it's obvious that the book of Faustus shouldn't be approached that way.
What's your point?
And to conclude, I'd like to read a prayer from the Nassim Psalm, quoted by the church father Hippolytus, that you can also find in Ramona's book, as well as full texts of many other Gnostic Gospels. Here it be. The soul, clad in the shape of a hind, is worn away with death's slavery. Now she has mastery and glimpses of light. Now she is plunged in misery and weeps. Now she is mourned, and herself rejoices. Now she weeps and is finally condemned. Now she is condemned and finally dies. And now she reaches a point where, hemmed in by evil, she knows no way out. Misled, she has entered a labyrinth. Then Jesus said, "Behold, Father, she wanders the earth, pursued by evil. Far from thy breath she is going astray. She is trying to flee bitter chaos, and does not know how she is to escape. Send me forth, O Father, therefore and I, bearing the seal, shall descend and wander all aeons through, all mysteries reveal. I shall manifest the forms of the gods, and teach them the secrets of the holy way, which I call Gnosis." As you can see, that's a short version of the book of Faustus, which is really the story of the Gnostic, which is also your story. I am Abraxas, broadcasting at the virtual Alexandria through theGodAboveGod.km. The road is ended, the song is over. Thought I'd have something more to say, but don't cultivate any troubles, my beloved true seekers, because like heaven above you, the spy that love you, I'm keeping all of your secrets safe with me tonight. Hello and goodbye as always.
Trapdoor! Trapdoor! Trapdoor was a man.